Hello. So this is my first full-length video of 2026. First of all, pardon the very jank setup. I have nowhere else to record, and it's only this spot where it's relatively quiet, kind of. And let's just say that this whole entire year is quite challenging already. And at the end, all I can say is, um, I just hope everyone's 2026 will be just okay by the end. So, as you guys saw, this quote was from Frank Herbert's book, Chapter House Dune, which is the last of the six original Dune saga. Now, the quote tells us many things: the flaws of democracy, of government, of those who held power, and those who seek more power. And you might be asking why is like my particular first ever video of 2026. And the reason is during the very last stretch of like 2025 of last year, I've started to have multiple videos getting recommended to me all over like my For You pages on all of the social media platforms that I use, that being YouTube, Instagram, and in TikTok specifically. And there was this one video that I watched, which ended up compelling me to make this particular video in the first place. And it's this video right here.
So right up front, loud and clear, let me say that I am against the use of generative AI in the production of art and content. And I want to also clearly pledge that I and my team will be committed to producing art and content without the use of generative AI. And let me
This particular video was made by Jazza, who is probably the most well-known and the most famous YouTuber that focuses on art-orientated content. So like painting, graphics design, and just arts and crafts basically. Now, over the course of his 44-minute video, Jazza explains how AI art isn't art. Like, the thumbnail by itself is already pretty much self-explanatory, but the title, which reads, "I was wrong about AI," tells us a bit more of a different story. And we will get back to that much later in the video, and instead we'll get back to this quote. This quote by Frank Herbert in Chapter House Dune, to me, tells us about the state of our current world and its political affairs and all that stuff. And despite Chapter House Dune being like written all the way back in, I believe it's like 1985, as I have here in my notes, it feels quite relevant today. And just to add background to this, Frank Herbert, the man behind the whole entire universe of Dune, right? He is a very interesting character. I mean, he lived quite an extraordinary life, just to say the least. Like, he enjoyed the outdoors because he worked on a farm. He enjoys science. He enjoys math. Never me. Growing up, he studied psychology and Zen Buddhism. Much later in his adult years, he was an environmentalist, whilst, having his own fair share of dabbling in psychedelic drugs, which might explain some of the stuff that he has in Dune. I won't get into every detail about Frank Herbert's life here in this video, obviously, because it's quite long and it's a lot. And instead, let's begin to focus on his politics and his philosophy.
Dune, they say, is religious commentary. The thing that has often been aimed at it is that it's philosophical fiction rather than science fiction.
Now, whilst Frank Herbert was still a struggling author, he would move to San Francisco, and while he was there, he befriended many other like psychologists and also other writers. And one of these psychologists that he befriended was named Irene Slattery. Now, it was thanks to Slattery that Frank Herbert himself got interested in the studies of the famous Carl Jung, with whom Slattery herself previously worked for. Now, if you guys don't know, Carl Jung is a famous psychiatrist from Switzerland and is responsible for the Jung's personality theory. Outside of that, I don't know everything else that Carl Jung has published throughout his life. And the thing is, psychology and the studies of the human mind isn't really my forte personally. But besides Carl Jung, Frank also ended up studying other stuff from Sigmund Freud, Alfred Adler, Karl Jaspers, and Jean Piaget. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce the surname there. And you can pretty much tell how these figures inspired his Dune books, where the human mind is the most powerful tool and the most powerful weapon in that universe, basically. And with everything focused on the power of one's mind, to better help explain that, hopefully, let's discuss his politics now.
I think people are responding to leadership overtures out of a very deep-seated instinctual process that goes back to our tribal roots. When we were tribesmen and possibly evolved into the wise old men who led the tribe if we lived long enough. And I think that this is something that just comes with the genes. We're born with it. And it's a very dangerous thing in this day and age, because technology has given us the tools of self-destruction. And if you put those tools in the hands of sick leaders, then we're really in trouble.
Now, as I said, I'm not going to go over everything about Frank Herbert's personal life, but I'm going to go off on a small little tangent about exactly that, because I feel like, personally, what I'm about to mention here is still quite important. It's no secret that Frank Herbert was a very complicated figure. In addition to what I mentioned earlier in this video, Herbert is by no means like a perfect person. Because in his personal life, in his family life, he wasn't the best father. Pretty much at all. He wasn't really perfect, nor was he the best. One of his two sons, named Bruce, who was gay, which Frank and his wife really did not like. They disapprove of Bruce's homosexuality. And this led to a massively strained relationship between both Bruce and his father. And it also went the same way with his other son, who's named Brian. And this was due to Frank pretty much not knowing how to be a proper father. And this was because Frank's own upbringing wasn't really normal either. Because when he was young, Frank ended up growing up on a farm, and he pretty much matured and started working at like a very young age at that farm. It made him independent in the long run, and made him do a lot of the tough decisions that an adult would still end up struggling with. But the downside to this was that he never really understood children. And Frank believed that children should be independent as much as he was when he was a kid, leading us to his like various political beliefs. Frank himself was an individualist, meaning he favors one's ability to be self-reliant and self-thinking. It makes sense why he studied Carl Jung in that sense, and the other bunch now, right? This then made him deeply skeptical of large institutions, which included large governments. And this is where we get a little bit of a twist now. You see, when Frank Herbert was still a child, his grandparents were members of a utopian commune in Washington state during like the early 1890s, which didn't really sit too well with him, which made him and the rest of his family all growing up mostly conservative. The reason why I say mostly is because his politics lean in multiple different ways. On top of being mostly conservative, Frank was a relatively liberal guy. When he was politically active, he was a registered Republican and was active within the party himself, working as a speechwriter. Most famously, he ended up working for Senator Guy Gordon. Now, obviously, when we're thinking about the Republican Party now, we see that they're practically just a far right fascistic party. But during Frank Herbert's time, both of the two parties, meaning both the Republican and the Democratic Party, they were more diverse in their political spectrum or in their political opinions and that stuff, where there was more of a conservative wing for the Democrats and a more liberal, or should I say, a little bit more of a leftist-ish wing within the Conservative Party for the Republicans. And for Frank in particular, he was part of the more libertarian, not so conservative part of the Republican Party. The best example of this was when he voiced his opposition to Senator Joseph McCarthy, who, by the way, he was a distant relative of. But that being said, even if they were like, families or like distant relatives, Frank made himself very, very clear to pretty much everyone that he was appalled by the effects of McCarthyism. And I've discussed this a bit already about McCarthy. Like, I've already discussed about McCarthyism and the Hollywood Blacklist in my Guilty by Suspicion movie review. So, to essentially summarize Frank's perspective on it, he believed that McCarthy was endangering the essential freedoms of citizens in the United States due to his relentless pursuit of rooting out communism from the United States, which basically just led to progressive and leftist ideals, like just in general, to just be non existent in the end in the United States. And really, the blacklisting and the Red Scare barred also American citizens from finding work because whoever deviated themselves from the ideologies of like capitalism, for example, and like from the ideologies of neoliberalism, finding jobs afterwards, after they were let go from their previous ones, was practically just impossible for these people. And to add on to all of this, when the United States got themselves involved in the whole, shit show at the time, that being the Cold War, specifically the war in Vietnam, let's just say that Frank was, let's just say that he was stressing. As we would say nowadays, stressing. This leads us to the next part of Frank Herbert's political philosophy.
What is the message? What is the statement that you're attempting to make here?
Don't trust leaders to always be right. I worked to create a leader in this book who would be really an attractive, charismatic person for all the good reasons, not for any bad reasons. Then power comes to him. He makes decisions. Some of his decisions made for millions of people, millions upon millions of people, don't work out too well. I think that our society was formed on a distrust for government, and we seem to have lost that distrust of government. I kid around and I say that my favorite president in recent years has been Richard Nixon, because he taught us to distrust government.
Now, it is this part, to me, about charismatic leaders, is by far Frank's most important lesson for every one of us. It's basically one of those sayings or warnings that have just gotten more and more relevant as time had gone on. And despite the popularity of, like, let's say, the United States president, JFK, right? Both then and now, when he was still living, basically, Frank Herbert didn't really like John F. Kennedy. And it's because, in his eyes, Frank described Kennedy as one of the most dangerous presidents in the history of the United States. Now, obviously, when you hear that, it sounds a bit too far, right? It sounds a little bit much. But if you take a second and try to understand his very own perspective, his perspective just starts to become a bit more reasonable. And at the end, you can basically just understand why he thinks that. Because from Frank Herbert's perspective, it mainly came through the lens of Kennedy's charisma. And it shows with Kennedy giving loud and proud speeches in whatever political rally that he gets himself into, right? And it made him very, very popular. For Frank, however, this element of charisma from a charismatic leader is what makes them dangerous. And Frank Herbert did explain in an interview that if a charismatic figure was placed in a position of power, and it doesn't really matter how, then the people will follow them without any second thought or without any further judgment. And if you analyze how much the American people gravitated like towards JFK, right? It really does validate his own point about charismatic leaders. And personally, there are a lot of things that I believe that Kennedy has done for good for the United States. So I don't completely agree with Herbert, but I will agree with him when it comes to certain aspects of Kennedy's like foreign policy, for example. And to give Kennedy credit, he was more skeptical and slightly more pragmatic than his successor, that being LBJ, right? But nevertheless, to say he did not cause the can to be kicked down the road when it comes to the US's involvement in Vietnam would be heavily diluted by their personal partisanship and my very own personal partisanship, I will admit. Of course, it's now a bit easier to say that now because per se, due to the fact that we have the benefits of looking back at all of this at a retrospective. But going back to Frank Herbert's take on charismatic leaders, looking at this now, I think we can all say is, damn, I bet if he was here, he'd be having the biggest "I told you so" moment. I'm pretty sure that's what would happen if Frank Herbert was here today. He would just say, "Well, I told you so, didn't I?" Like, just look at all of the trash fire politicians that are in power right now, and look at what they have in common in terms of what got them elected or what got them very popular in the first place. Like, look at Trump, Farage, Orban, Putin, Milei. In addition to all of this, Frank Herbert had the same sentiment when it came to religion. I mean, it's kind of not really a secret that charisma and religion go hand in hand together. Now, I may sound like I am against religion by what I'm saying in this video, but I'm not. Despite not being religious myself anymore, I still believe that the world still needs religion in a sense as kind of like a form of moral compass for some people or for like a lot of people, right? Just not those cultish ones, all right? That's where we draw the line. And don't get me started on that, by the way. I mean, there are those like, mega churches, evangelicals. Hell, even over here in the Philippines, we have the INC, or Iglesia ni Cristo. Oh man, don't get me started on those fuckers. You know, I might make a future video about those people because, good God, they are something. Now, the reason why I use them as an example is to help hammer home Frank's point about people's tendency to follow Masonic figures. Because when religion it gets spun and intertwined in government and in politics, and the latter begins to use religious justifications to make, like, their decisions happen, or have that become the reason why the choices of government is what it is, well, it will almost invariably lead to tyranny, which we have seen times throughout our human history, and also right now we're seeing it again. Only this time, it's just in a different setting. Now, I want to go back to the Iglesia ni Cristo, or the INC, right? Because personally, it's quite, close to home, aka literally at home. um, and it's also because of how much influence the INC has in Philippine politics. Literally, like, all of their members, like literally all what the members need is their ever-loving and not so exploitative leader to tell them, who to vote for during national elections. And they will just blindly do so without, like, question. And now, thanks to them, well, let's just say basically my country is the living incarnation of hell on earth. Just to put things lightly. Yes, I know that's putting it lightly, but it's true. Now, to add on to this amount of sway upon, like, a big group or a massive mass of people, it just doesn't involve politicians or religious leaders. It could just be anyone who holds, like, a massive sway of influence. Like, for example, this guy, the creator of Grok. Yeah. Speaking of Grok, let's discuss Frank Herbert's stance on AI.
The technology is inherently appealing to people who do not respect or appreciate the journey to becoming an artist. This is not a motivation for artists who are committed to a journey of pursuing and creating art, because pain is a part of the process. They've learned it by being on that journey. It does, however, motivate corporations and businesses that want to cut costs, and individuals who want a shortcut to profit or attention or validation.
Now, let's circle back to why I decided to make this video in the first place. AI, obviously, has been on the rise for literally, like, the past few years. I have personally seen this when, some of my fellow university students have started to use AI, like ChatGPT, to help write their stuff, like their essays, their answers on, like, their tests or whatever. Now, I will admit, I am guilty of this as well. But in my course, which was history, that was the course that I took in college for my undergrad, we had a much stronger enforcement when it comes to the ethics of, when it comes to, like, the ethics, there we go. We had a much stronger enforcement when it comes to the ethics of using AI in our curriculum. And basically, just use it as a tool. That's it. Like checking your grammar stuff, you know how it is. And I should say, I am very, very thankful for, like, all of the teachers and all of the professors that I've had throughout my academic life for teaching, myself and others who were around my generation very, very early on about the, ethics surrounding the usage of the internet technology and all that stuff. Like ever since middle school, we had lessons and talks like that. Now, going back to Jazz's video that I've shown you guys earlier, like shown clips here and there and the thumbnail and all that stuff, because the year prior, Jazza was actually a bit of a massive supporter for AI usage in the space of art. Now, obviously, this was like a year or so back, and well, a lot of things have changed. By this point, we've come to understand that AI hasn't been made to help people utilize it as a tool, or at least it hasn't been presented that way. The multiple claims that Jazza cites in his video were the many studies and research on how AI causes more harm than good, like from environmental damages from the data centers polluting the surrounding areas to future generations' learning abilities, socializing skills, and their critical thinking being damaged due to their heavy reliance on AI. And when it comes to the subject of AI art, Jazza explains that it's purely just a way for big corporations to just gain more capital for themselves and stifle the needed support for like every artist that they so heavily rely on. Not to mention, Jazz's very own older brother, known as Shadiversity here on YouTube, and someone who I used to watch like way, way back in the day, he is a massive supporter of AI art, and yeah, it's fucking insane. I am just saying that it's quite insane. Now, I'm not gonna dwell too much on Shad, but let's just say he has become a little bit of a lost cause, but that dates like years back. I mean, when he admitted and even defended AI art, he ended up throwing his own artists that helped publish his book under the bus so that he could like cut the costs for his book that he's publishing. And all I heard from the reviews, even though I haven't read it myself, Shad's book, that is, I don't ever plan to, but there have been several reviews made about it, and according to those and other videos on YouTube that are made about his book, well, it ain't so good, to say the least, because who would have thought that a Mary Sue like character who is a PDF file would be so bad, right? Now I could go on and on about how much AI has practically ruined like everything, but let's go back to this excerpt from the first Dune book. Once men turned their thinking over to machines in the hope that this would set them free, but that only permitted other men with machines to enslave them. Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a man's mind, Paul quoted. Right out of the Butlerian Jihad and the Orange Catholic Bible, she said. But what the OC Bible should have said is, thou shalt not make a machine to counterfeit a human mind. This dialogue exchange was between Paul Atreides and the Reverend Mother Gaius. If we were to interpret this to like our real world and see how software engineers and big massive tech company corps and AI developers have been producing like, all of these programs, we're basically already going against this last part that was said, thou shalt not make a machine to counterfeit a human mind. Now, when Frank Herbert like wrote all of this, obviously, the AI stuff that we have nowadays, it didn't exist. It really didn't exist yet. But this is what makes authors like Herbert, Huxley, and Orwell very admirable. It is the fact that they were able to like understand the shifting tides of societal developments and technology, and saw and they just see the many potential downsides if they weren't kept in check. So in terms of Herbert's view on technology, he emphasizes throughout Dune that humanity shouldn't become subservient to technology in the sense that we're all too reliant on it. And now we're just seeing the consequences when tech or anything in general isn't kept in regulation or safeguarded in like a certain degree. Where we're heading right now politically and in terms of what human advancement is going towards, all I can say, it's quite troubling. It's troubling, really. I mean, it's kind of the reason why I put off this video for so long. Unfortunately, I ended up procrastinating on this thing because writing and researching like on this topic, it really just made me feel like dreadful. It just makes me feel like the world is going to hell and like everything is just dog shit, basically. Like, obviously, it fucking sucks. Now, with all that being said, despite all of that, as much as I hate this world right now, at the moment, I still believe we could turn all of this around, like for the better, basically. One of the first steps that we really need to take, however, for that to really happen, is that we, as a human species, we have to accept the fact that it's obviously not going to happen overnight, like instantly. And another is that we have to understand the many downsides of technological, political, and societal developments when they aren't fully analyzed and fully looked into, which is pretty much why folks like Trump and Musk are basically seeing the amount of like successes or lack thereof of success, for the lack of the better term. But again, as I mentioned, I still believe we can turn this all around for the better. It just starts with us common folk having a much keener eye. Like, we have to make sure our minds stay vigilant against things that would take advantage of us and question ourselves with both our own intelligence and emotion, and not really rely on some AI and some Masonic figure to answer all of our questions or like to verify some information, unlike these fuckers. Oh yeah, just keep asking Grok, it definitely has all the answers. And it really does irritate me that I see some of these tech bros boasting how AI would revolutionize and bring humanity to its next stage of advancement, whilst not giving a crap, not giving a damn about the negative effects that it has on the environment, like I said, and the thinking abilities of like people, artists, and even in other crucial fields like, medicine. Now, the very last bit, the latter, basically, medicine, to me is quite personal since both of my parents are doctors. And AI developments in the medical field have been slowly advancing. But in my opinion, it's actually for the better since, AI could help detect and diagnose cancer much earlier and even help with very microscopic surgeries that, us humans won't be able to perform. The downside to this, however, is what would happen to the doctors themselves, like, human doctors. What happens when we rely too much on these machines and in the sudden instant they fail? What's going to happen to us?
I'm not really a doctor. I know that's what my ID says, but I never have been. Cheated the medical exams. What does a doctor these days need to know about manually resetting bones? When was the last time a top surgeon actually cut someone open? That's what the robots are for. Doctors these days read diagnoses off of computer readouts. For that, I'm perfectly qualified. But what good is it when I'm not connected to the main network? I'm bleeding. I've got glowing green pustules growing on my hands. I run a self-scan and it tells me I've got skin irritation. The only thing I studied in medical school was how to lie convincingly. What the hell do I know about how to treat an alien disease? I'm actually going to die down here.
Subnautica is a really great game, by the way. I really hope I get to play it one day when I get a PC. Now, the very last thing I want to say before I finally close out this dreadful, dreadful video, not to sugarcoat it too much, but again, we really, really need to make sure that we stay vigilant and we have to analyze pretty much everything at this point. Another is that I feel like we have to make sure that we read more books like these, and even learn about the authors themselves in our schools personally. I feel like this needs to become like a mandatory thing all throughout the world, because in my personal opinion, not only do I believe that Dune should be taught in like schools in a sense, or it should be like taught more generally, basically, but I also believe other books that are set in like a very dystopian world, like 1984 or Fahrenheit 451, or even The Brave New World by Huxley. I feel like these should also be more generally taught alongside lessons on their authors, basically, because an insight into their works, for me personally, could help us better understand the current political challenges of what humanity is facing today, what they faced in the past, and probably what they're going to face in the future. Especially since many of us right now are facing like uncertain times through similar political trends that Herbert and others had the foresight to question, and question heavily they did. And all I can say is now is hopefully we'll be able to see through it, and that we become more conscious about how we approach our own politics and our own advancements in humanity. And I think besides all of that, yeah, that's all I really hope for. That's what I really hope for us and for everyone else. I'll see you guys.